Okay, so let's say there's this guy. We'll call him Fernando for the moment, all right? And Fernando has decided to start a business. So here, we'll give him a desk. And let's see, a desk. It's going to have some drawers in it, And that's where he works. And Fernando, in his business, he's decided that what he's going to do is go into the residential rental property business. And so he goes out and he finds a building, which he's going to put his desk in. Draw a little building. It's got a first floor unit. It's got a second floor unit. And it's got a third floor unit, right? Okay. All right. And that's Fernando's apartment house business. Right? Now, how does Fernando get this business? Well, he finds someone who's selling this apartment building. He enters into a contract with that seller, purchase agreement for the building. How does he pay for that? Well, he has a little money of his own, but in all likelihood, he probably goes out to some bank. Here, we'll give it a column, some stairs, some columns. Right? And we'll put money in this bank. And the bank loans Fernando using a mortgage, some cash that Fernando then uses to pay for the building that he's buying from whoever's selling it. Now, okay, so far we have a business, a rental property that has a source of financing, a bank. But we haven't really come across anything that looks like a business organization, right? So far, the legal concepts that we're running into are a mortgage and a purchase agreement. And those are just contracts, right? So you did that already in your first year class. So why are we talking about business organizations? Well, maybe we haven't gotten to the point where we've found the complexifying feature of our business that leaves us from contract and takes us to biz orgs. So let's see what else. Who else would be involved in our business? Well, obviously, for this to be a business that has any future, there has to be some sort of revenue. And so let's create some folks over here. Some more. We need at least 3 because we got 3 units. And what are we going to call these? We're going to call these customers or clients, or in the case of a real estate business, tenants. All right, we have a bank. Tenants. And what do tenants do? Tenants pay money in exchange for the right to live in the building, just like clients would pay for product or services money in exchange for those products or services. And then Fernando, the business owner, uses that money to pay for the various costs associated with running the building, including servicing the mortgage. But there are going to be taxes, there's going to be the need to fix things every once in a while, and so on. But again, have we now found a thing called a business organization in our story? And the answer is no. The thing that governs a relationship between a tenant and a rental property is a thing called a lease. A lease, while a specialized, perhaps kind of contract, is nevertheless still just a contract. You may take an advanced course called real estate transactions or something like that. But in any event, a lease is a contract, not a business organization. And so far we haven't found our need for the BizOrg concept. But we have been filling up poor Fernando's little drawer. He has a folder for a mortgage, a folder for the purchase agreement, a folder for the leases. But is there something else, something that triggers and that makes more complex this thing such that we get to the point where we have a business organization? Well, we talked about maintenance. Maybe Fernando has decided that he doesn't like shoveling snow or painting apartments or doing plumbing. Maybe he realizes he needs help finding tenants, so he hires a manager, a real estate agent. And so we'll have someone over here who works for Fernando, right? Does a work, so agent or employee, which is a kind of agent, and in exchange for that work, gets money. Okay. Now, what's the underpinnings, the legal foundation for this relationship? Well, usually it's some form of oral agreement. Most employees don't have a contract. They work under an oral understanding and are at will. But again, the relationship is basically a contract. And so we have another folder in the drawer, but we're not yet at the stage where we've come across something that looks like a business organization. So when does that happen? And why do we need them? So let's look at a different structure. Suppose instead of doing it all personally through a series of contracts, Fernando decides to use a business organization to run his business. And what he does is he creates a thing, right? Well, we're going to see that there are lots of different types of business organizations. It could be a corporation, it could be a partnership, it could be a limited liability company, etc. And we're going to talk about those different forms of organization. But let's just focus on generically the idea of a thing, right? And why would Fernando create a thing? Well, instead of having a lease with our tenants over here, Fernando says, nope, I'm not your lessor. The thing, Fernando's rental property, Inc. or LLC, is your landlord. And so the lease arrangement is between the tenants and the entity, right? Instead of borrowing the money personally, Fernando asks the bank to lend the money with its columns to the entity, right? So the loan now is between the business organization and the bank. Although I'll admit that in all likelihood, the bank is still going to ask Fernando to sign a guarantee of that loan. Still, the primary obligation is between the organization and the bank. Similarly, again, the relationship with the agent is not now between Fernando and the realtor or the maintenance guy, but is between the entity and that person. And Fernando's relationship to the building has changed. He doesn't own the building anymore. What he owns is the thing, which in turn owns the building, right? He is now the shareholder or the member or the partner. This is Fernando. Now, why would Fernando prefer that? What might motivate someone to set up an entity rather than owning things directly like the way they did? Well, probably the most common reason asserted for creating a business organization is in order to achieve separateness, exactly this differentiation that we see here between the business itself and the owner, separate ownership from the liabilities primarily of running the business, right? So what do we mean by that? Well, separateness. Suppose someone were walking down the hallway of our rental property and fell, or suppose our maintenance guy was working and he drops the hammer off a ladder and it hurts somebody. What happens in the original structure? Well, since it's Fernando's building, or since Fernando is the employer of the agent, of the employee, Fernando is responsible for that accident. In the end, it's his money, his assets that are going to satisfy any judgment that gets brought. And presumably he'll have enough insurance to cover himself, but if he doesn't, he goes out of pocket. But if what you do is set up a business entity, one of the things that's available to you by doing that, although not in every case, as we'll see, is the idea of limited liability. Right? So not only can you, from an organizational point of view, put all of your items into this separate entity, which is convenient from just simply organizational point of view, right? Put everything in one space. It also comes with the option of creating limited liability. And so Fernando's personal assets can be shielded from the liabilities created by the entity itself, right? Now, why might that be attractive? Well, there's the obvious limitation on liability answer, but perhaps more importantly for the development of business is that this separateness allows for transferability and division. My mother says I should have been a doctor. You see my handwriting. Division of ownership. Okay. So if one of the consequences of being the owner of a building is that you're exposed to the slip and fall liabilities, or if you're the owner and you employ somebody, you are exposed to their mistakes, right? It's going to make it a lot less attractive to be the owner of businesses, right? And so let's say Fernando wanted to find 2 or 3 people to invest at 10% each in this business, right? Who would want to be a 10% owner and yet be exposed to the full liabilities of running the business when they don't have control, they're not involved day to day, etc. Imagine instead of being a real estate business, you're dealing with a nuclear reactor or some very high risk business. How would anyone ever get that financed? How would anyone bring in co-owners to those kinds of situations, right? How would anyone create the possibility of having multiple owners if there wasn't also the ability to offer those multiple owners limited liability, right? So those two things often come together, right? And so when we're going to see a business organization, what we're often dealing with is the possibility of there being more than just Fernando in the ownership box, right? In order to have this be achievable, likely, right, in most cases, you're going to want to have limited liability, and you're going to want to be able to separate the assets and liabilities, the operations of the business, from the owners themselves by creating an entity that they own a indivisible interest in, as opposed to all being co-owners of the assets themselves. Okay? And the other reason is, although we're going to spend a lot of time understanding how contract and the freedom of contract, or the concept of modification of arrangements through contract, apply in business organizations. And what do I mean by that? I mean that you can, as the co-owners of a business, often customize your relationship with each other by modifying the default rules, by modifying the sort of standard answer that the business org rules provide by entering into some contract. So contract will still be a very important concept for us even when we move to the business org level. The truth is, though, that one of the conveniences of using a business organization is the 2 basic questions that you have to answer when you start having multiple owners is who gets to decide things and what are their relative economic rights, right? Where does the money go? Those 2 big questions come with standard answers when you adopt a business organization. Or perhaps more importantly, they come with standard options that you can choose as the co-owners for your business organization. And so those building blocks that the law of business organizations provides help us put together structures in which multiple persons gather together in order to invest in a business enterprise.